The Krell flagship hung in orbit like a black mountain carved from darkness itself. Its hull stretched for kilometers. Weapons lined its surface. Fighter squadrons drifted around it like hungry predators. Every species in this sector feared the Krell dominion. Most surrendered before a battle even began. Inside the flagship's command center, hundreds of officers worked beneath towering holographic displays. Fleet movements, planetary bombardment plans, projected casualty reports. Everything needed to crush an empire. At the center of it all stood Commander Thrakagar, 8 feet tall, broad enough to block a doorway. His armor looked less like clothing and more like part of his body. Scars crossed his gray exoskeleton, each one earned in war, each one a reminder of victories. When the doors opened, conversation slowed, then stopped completely. A single human entered. No armor, no weapons, no escort, just simple dark clothing. Daniel Carter walked forward calmly. Every eye in the room followed him. The contrast was almost absurd. The Krell looked like creatures built for conquest. Daniel looked like someone who belonged in a library. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Commander Thrakagar laughed. The sound echoed through the chamber. So this is Earth's representative? His compound eyes narrowed. The mighty humans send a pet diplomat to negotiate on behalf of the Zyrathian Empire? Several officers chuckled. Others openly laughed. Daniel stopped a few meters away. His expression never changed. His hands remained comfortably behind his back. His heartbeat remained perfectly steady. The Krell found this amusing. Daniel found it useful. Underestimation was one of the most powerful weapons in the galaxy. Tell me, human. Thrakagar stepped forward. Each heavy footstep shook the floor. Is this supposed to be a joke? Daniel looked up at the giant commander, then smiled politely. No. The simple answer somehow made the room quieter. Thrakagar tilted his head. No? No. Daniel's voice remained calm. Earth takes this situation very seriously. The Krell commander stared at him, waiting, expecting fear. Daniel showed none. Not arrogance, not defiance, just complete calm. And somehow that was more unsettling. Around the command center, officers exchanged glances. Something felt wrong. They couldn't explain why. This human should have been intimidated. Any sane being would be. Yet Daniel stood there as comfortably as if he were discussing weather. Finally, Thrakagar laughed again. You are brave. The commander leaned closer. Or perhaps foolish. Do you understand where you are? Daniel nodded. Of course. You are standing aboard the most powerful warship in this quadrant. Another nod. Correct. You are surrounded by soldiers who could tear you apart. Also correct. The amusement slowly faded from Thrakagar's face. Because Daniel sounded like a man confirming simple facts. Not a man acknowledging danger. Not a man realizing he might die. A small silence settled across the room. Then Daniel asked a question. One simple question. Commander, have you ever wondered why Earth sent me alone? The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Several officers frowned. Thrakagar crossed his massive arms. Enlighten me. Daniel smiled slightly. The same harmless smile he had worn in the palace gardens. The same smile Queen Zareth had seen during quiet dinners. The same smile everyone had mistaken for weakness. Because if negotiations fail... He paused. Earth doesn't need anyone else here. The command center became silent. Completely silent. For the first time, Thrakagar's amusement vanished. Not because of the threat. The words themselves weren't threatening. It was the way Daniel said them. Calmly. Matter-of-factly. As though he wasn't making a warning. As though he was simply explaining reality. And suddenly the Krell commander understood something that everyone in the Zyrathian Empire had missed. This human wasn't nervous. He wasn't weak. He wasn't harmless. He had simply spent months pretending to be. Back on Zyrath Prime, Queen Zyrath sat in her palace, unaware that events were already moving beyond her control. She still thought of Daniel as the quiet husband who liked books and gardens, the man who listened more than he spoke, the man everyone overlooked. Tomorrow she would learn the truth. Tomorrow the galaxy would learn why Earth had risen so quickly among the stars, and why the most dangerous humans were never the loud ones. They were the ones nobody noticed until it was far too late. The other Krell made clicking sounds that Daniel understood was laughter. He smiled politely and introduced himself as Daniel Carter, and said he was the husband of Queen Zareth. He said he had come to discuss terms. The commander said there were no terms to discuss. The Zyraean Empire would surrender completely, or the Krell would take their worlds by force. Those were the only two options. Daniel nodded like he was thinking about this, and then asked what would happen after the Krell conquered the Zyrathian worlds. Would they move on to human space next? Thrakagar said maybe, and that it would be a short campaign, because humans were weak. Daniel agreed in that same pleasant voice. He said yes, humans probably seemed weak. He started walking slowly around the command center, with his hands behind his back, like he was just curious about the equipment. The guards watched him, but did not stop him, because he looked so harmless. He examined the displays, and nodded to himself, and kept that small smile on his face. He asked the commander if Krell intelligence had briefed him on human military history. Thrakagar said they had read the reports, and that humans had fought wars on their own planet, which seemed primitive and unimportant. Daniel stopped walking and turned to look at the commander. He said yes, humans had fought each other for thousands of years. He asked if the reports mentioned the casualty numbers from those wars. The Mongol invasions that killed millions. The world wars that killed tens of millions. The resource wars that nearly destroyed the planet. He said humans had killed more humans than any alien species had ever managed to kill. Thrakagar asked if this was supposed to frighten him. Daniel said, no, not frighten, just inform. He said that he had not come to negotiate the surrender of the Zarathian Empire. He had come to offer Commander Thrakagar a chance to withdraw his fleet peacefully. The command center erupted with clicking laughter. Several Krell officers slapped their armored legs. One said something in their own language that made the others laugh harder. Thrakagar leaned forward and his voice was dangerous now. He asked if the human dared to threaten him on his own ship. Daniel said it was not a threat but a professional courtesy. He said that before he became a diplomat, he had a different career, and asked if the commander would like to know what it was. Before Thrakagar could answer, the alarm started blaring throughout the ship. Red emergency lights came on, and Krell officers rushed to their stations. Voices shouted in their language, and Thrakagar spun to look at the displays. Ships across his fleet were reporting system failures. Power was dropping. Weapons were offline. Navigation was glitching. Ship after ship reported the same problems spreading like a virus through the entire fleet. Thrakagar turned back to Daniel, and his hand went to his weapon, but Daniel held up one hand and told him not to do that. He said his finger was resting on a switch in his pocket, and if his heart stopped, or if he was hurt in any way, the problems his fleet was experiencing would get much worse. He said the Krell had about 3 minutes before life support failed on every ship. The commander said it was impossible because Krell systems were isolated and secured. Daniel agreed that the security was very impressive. He said it had taken him almost 10 minutes to break through it during the shuttle ride over. He pulled out the small device from his pocket and showed it to Thrakagar. Data scrolled across its surface showing access to navigation and weapons and life support and reactor systems on every single ship in the fleet. Daniel introduced himself again. He said his name was Daniel Carter, and before he became a diplomat, he was a cyber warfare specialist for Earth's Special Operations Command. He said he had been inside their systems since his shuttle entered sensor range. He had complete control over every critical function on every Krill ship. He could shut down their reactors, or open their airlocks, or send them crashing into each other. He walked closer to the commander, and his voice stayed calm and friendly. He explained what was going to happen next. Thrakagar would order his fleet to withdraw from Zarathian space immediately. He would send a message to the Krell Dominion, saying that both the Zarathian Empire and Earth were not suitable targets for conquest. In exchange, Daniel would restore all their systems and let them leave in peace. Thrakagar asked what would happen if he refused. Daniel's smile got a little bit wider. He said that he would introduce the commander to a human military concept called mutually assured destruction. He said that even though he was standing on this ship, he had already sent copies of every security flaw he had found back to Earth and to Zarathia. If the Krell killed him, or attacked either civilization, there were thousands of other humans who could do exactly what he just did. They could the entire Krell Mill military from across the galaxy without ever getting close. The command center was silent, except for the alarms. Thraxgar stared at the small human standing in front of him. This creature with no armor and no weapons had destroyed his fleet in minutes, and he had not even known it was happening until it was too late. Every instinct told him to kill the human, but his tactical mind understood the trap. If he killed Daniel Carter, it would start a war with Earth, and based on what he had just seen, that was a war the Krell could not win. He asked how one human had done this. Daniel said it was because everyone made the same mistake about humanity. They saw soft skin and assumed weakness. They saw no claws and assumed humans were not predators. But he explained that humans were not strong because of their bodies. They were strong because of their minds. Humans made tools and solved problems and survived. And humans had been fighting wars with each other for so long that they had become very good at it. He tapped the device in his hand. 2 minutes until life support failed. He asked what the commander's decision was. Thraxgar looked around at his officers and saw fear in their faces. He had led the Kreml military for 20 years and won 100 battles, but he had never faced an enemy like this. Queen Zareth stood in the command center, watching the sensor displays and feeling like her world was ending. Every few minutes, another Krell ship would go dark on the screen. Their power signatures would flicker and fade like candles being blown out one by one. Her military officers had no explanation. General Vexnor kept asking his technicians what was happening, but they had no answers. Some kind of system failure was spreading through the Krell fleet, but they could not tell what was causing it or how it worked. One of the junior officers asked about Daniel's shuttle in Zareth, felt her chest tighten. The shuttle was still docked with the Krell flagship. Her husband was somewhere on that ship. She had sent him there expecting him to die, and now something impossible was happening, and she did not understand any of it. Part of her wanted to send rescue ships, but she knew that would be seen as an attack. All she could do was watch and wait. Then the message came through. It was audio only, and the voice was Commander Thraxgar. Zareth had heard recordings of his voice before, from intelligence briefings. He always sounded confident and aggressive, but now there was something different in his tone. It was respect, or maybe fear. He said that the Krell Dominion was withdrawing from Zarethian space immediately. He said that both the Zaraean Empire and human territories would be classified as restricted zones. The Krell would not return. Then the transmission ended. The command center was silent. Everyone stared at the speakers like they expected someone to say it was a joke, but the sensor display started showing movement. The Krell ships were turning away. One by one, they jumped to hyperspace and vanished. Within an hour, the entire fleet was gone. The threat that had seemed certain to destroy them all had simply left. Zareth did not celebrate. She stood very still, trying to understand what had just happened. Then she turned and ran. She ran through the corridors of the palace and down to the shuttle bay, and arrived just as Daniel's shuttle was landing. She was breathing hard, and her armor felt heavy. General Vexnor and half the War Council came running in behind her. Everyone wanted to see the human who had somehow saved them all. The shuttle door opened, and Daniel walked out. He looked exactly the same as when he had left. His clothes were clean, and his hair was neat, and he had that calm expression on his face. He smiled when he saw Zareth waiting. He said that the mission was accomplished, and the Krell had agreed to withdraw. His voice was casual, like he had just come back from a walk in the garden. General Vexnor pushed forward and demanded to know what happened. He said that intelligence had monitored the whole encounter, and they knew Daniel had crippled the Krell fleet somehow. He wanted to know how a diplomat had done something their entire military could not do. Daniel looked slightly embarrassed. He said that he had simply talked with Commander Thraxgar, and they had reached an understanding. Jarthra stepped closer to her husband. She said that he had not just talked. He had infiltrated their systems and held an entire warfleet hostage. She had received a full report from her intelligence officers, who had been listening to every word. Daniel made a small shrugging gesture and admitted that yes, he had taken some precautions. He said he was sure they could have resolved things diplomatically if needed, but it was better to have a backup plan. The Queen asked him who he really was. She said that the man she married was supposed to be a diplomat and a scholar, someone gentle and quiet. Daniel said he was those things and meant it. He said he genuinely loved Zarethan poetry and found their architecture fascinating. But he admitted that he had been a soldier before the peace, before the diplomatic corps. He had served in humanity's cyber warfare division. He said humans did not talk about it much, because it tended to frighten people. He met Zareth's eyes, and for the first time, she saw what had been hidden there all along. Not weakness, but control, not fragility, but carefully hidden strength. It was like looking at a different person wearing the same face. General Vexner asked if every human was like this. Daniel said, "Not exactly, but most humans had skills that might surprise other species." He explained that humanity was young in space. They had only been traveling to other stars for a few decades, but they had been surviving on Earth and fighting each other for hundreds of thousands of years. It made them very good at adapting and solving problems. Sareth felt her understanding shift. She had thought she was doing Daniel a favor by marrying him. She had thought she was giving him status and protection, and a place in her empire. She realized now that she had completely misunderstood what he brought to their union. He had not needed her protection. He had been protecting her, and she had not even known it. She asked if he would continue to be her husband, now that she knew the truth. Daniel's smile softened into something warm. He said, "Of course." He said he married her because he wanted to build a bridge between their peoples, and that was still true. The fact that he could defend that bridge if necessary did not change why he built it in the first place. He held out his hand in the human gesture of partnership. He also said that he had grown fond of her. He said she was brilliant and strong, and that she actually listened to different opinions, which was rare in leaders. Zareth took his hand and felt the warmth of his skin against her scales. She said she had much to learn about humanity. Daniel agreed, and said that they all did. He said that was what made it exciting. Over the next few weeks, the relationship between Earth and the Zarathian Empire changed. Trade increased, and cultural exchanges began. Human engineers arrived to teach manufacturing techniques. Zarathian scientists went to Earth to study. The two civilizations started working together in ways that neither had expected. And at the center of it all was the marriage between a queen and a man who was so much more than he seemed. Sheriff spent more time with Daniel now. They had dinner together most evenings, and talked about their days. He told her stories about Earth, and she told him about the challenges of ruling an empire. She found that she liked him, not just as a political partner, but as a person. He was easy to talk to, and he made her laugh. He was thoughtful and kind, and underneath all of that was a core of strength that she was only beginning to understand. The palace staff noticed the change too. The queen smiled more. She seemed less stressed, and the quiet human who had been so easy to ignore was suddenly at the center of attention. People wanted to know about Earth and about human capabilities. Daniel handled it all with the same gentle humor he brought to everything else. The human delegation arrived 3 months after the Krell incident, and they came on a ship that looked like it was built for cargo rather than diplomacy. Queen Zareth stood on the landing platform with Daniel beside her and watched as the humans disembarked. There were 12 of them, and they all looked as ordinary as her husband. They wore simple clothes and carried small bags, and smiled politely when they were introduced. Zareth had learned not to judge by appearances, but it was still strange to think these normal-looking people might be as dangerous as Daniel. The leader of the delegation was a woman named Linda Hayes, who said she was an industrial engineer. She was short, and had gray hair, and looked like someone's grandmother. She shook Zareth's hand with a firm grip, and said she was excited to see Zarathian manufacturing facilities. Over the next few days, Linda toured factories and met with production managers. She made suggestions that seemed simple, but when implemented, they increased efficiency by 30%. Zarth learned that Linda had designed the shield generators that protected every human colony in space. The grandmother engineer had saved millions of lives with her work. There was a scientist named Peter Kim who seemed distracted and kept forgetting where he left his datapad. He would start talking about quantum mechanics, and then trail off mid-sentence to write equations on whatever surface was nearby. The Zyraean scientists thought he was eccentric, but harmless, until they saw his credentials. He had 3 doctoral degrees, and had solved the fusion power equations that had stumped researchers for generations. His reactors powered half of human space. A quiet woman named Rachel Moore served as Daniel's assistant, and Zarath barely noticed her at first. She was polite and efficient, and always seemed to be in the background taking notes. Then Zarath saw Rachel's military file by accident, when Daniel left it on his desk. Rachel was a decorated combat pilot who had defended a mining colony from pirate raiders single-handedly. She had destroyed 12 enemy ships before reinforcements arrived. The quiet assistant was a war hero. Jarth asked Daniel why humans hid what they were capable of. They were having dinner together in their shared quarters, which had become a regular thing. Daniel thought about the question while he ate. He said it was cultural. Humans had a long history of fighting, and they learned that the loudest warrior was not always the most dangerous. There was a saying on Earth about speaking softly and carrying a big stick. It meant you did not need to brag about your strength if you actually had it. The Queen said that the Krell had certainly learned that lesson. Intelligence reports showed that the Kreda Dominion was being very quiet about what happened. They had not told their subject species about the defeat. They were pretending the withdrawal was strategic, but the Kree military was completely re-evaluating their plans regarding human space. Some reports suggested they were afraid. Daniel said that was good. Maybe the Krell would choose diplomacy over conquest from now on. That would be better than the alternative. Zareth asked what the alternative was. Daniel put down his fork and looked serious. He said that war with humanity was not something anyone should want. Humans were very good at war, and they did not like to lose. The galaxy was better if everyone stayed friends. After that conversation, Zareth requested access to human military history files. What she read kept her up at night. Humans had fought thousands of wars on their planet. They had developed weapons that seemed impossible. They had split atoms and used them to destroy cities. They had created diseases that could kill millions. They had fought wars that lasted for years and decades and even generations. One war had killed over 70 million people, and it happened less than 200 years ago. But humans had also created art that made her cry. They wrote music that stirred something deep in her chest. Their literature explored ideas that Zaraean philosophers had never considered. They were contradictions, walking around in soft skin, capable of terrible violence and incredible compassion, often at the same time. Jarth told Daniel one evening that she was glad he chose to be a diplomat. He smiled and said he was too. He said that building things was more satisfying than destroying them. They were sitting in the garden under the moons, and the air was warm. Daniel had brought 2 glasses of human wine, and they were sharing it while watching the stars. Zareth realized that somewhere along the way, her feelings had changed. This was not just a political arrangement anymore. She cared about this strange, gentle, dangerous man. General Vexnor came to her a few weeks later with a proposal. He had been working with the human military advisors, and he said their tactical thinking was extraordinary. He wanted to create a joint training program between Zarathian and human forces. They could learn from each other. Zareth approved immediately and asked what he thought they could learn from humans. The general said strategy certainly, but more than that, humans had a concept called asymmetric warfare. They understood how to fight enemies that were bigger and stronger. Since most species in the galaxy were physically superior to humans, they had become masters at finding other ways to win. Zareth asked what humans could learn from Zarathians. Vexor said, honor and purpose. He said, humans were skilled fighters, but many of them struggled with the weight of what they could do. They needed to understand that strength used for good was not something to be ashamed of. It was a wise observation, and it made Zareth think. She saw it in Daniel, sometimes a hesitation, like he was always holding back, like he was afraid of what he might do if he let go completely. She understood now that this was not weakness, it was control. Daniel had the power to entire fleets, and he chose not to use it unless absolutely necessary. That took more strength than most people would ever understand. The cultural exchange program started soon after. Young Zarathians went to Earth to study. Human students came to the Empire to learn. Scientists collaborated on projects. Military officers trained together. Trade routes expanded. Both civilizations were changing and growing stronger together. Daniel continued to surprise Zaroth. He spoke 6 languages now, including 2 she had never heard of. He could discuss military strategy with generals, and quantum physics with scientists, and art theory with painters. He knew how to fix a broken reactor, and how to cook elaborate meals, and how to calm a panicking crowd. He was all these things. And he had been hiding in plain sight as a modest diplomat. One night she asked him if he had always planned to reveal himself. He said no, not really. He had been prepared to stay quiet and unremarkable for years if necessary. The Krell attack had forced his hand, but he did not regret it. Zareth asked what he would have done if the Krell had not come. Daniel smiled and said he would have just been her husband. reading books and walking in gardens, and maybe falling in love with his wife. The words hung in the air between them. Zareth felt her heart beat faster. She asked if that was what was happening. Was he falling in love with her? Daniel reached out and took her hand. He said he thought maybe he already had. The crisis came exactly 1 year after their wedding. Zareth was reviewing trade agreements when the emergency alarm sounded for the second time since she had known Daniel. Her heart sank, because she knew that sound meant something terrible was happening. She ran to the command center and found her staff already gathered around the main display. General Vexnor looked pale, which was difficult for Azira. He pointed at the hologram and explained the situation quickly. An asteroid was on a collision course with their largest colony world. It was massive, and it was moving fast, and it would hit in 72 hours. The impact would be extinction level. The colony had 8 billion people living on it, and there was no way to evacuate them all in time. Even if they used every ship in the Empire, they could maybe save a few million. The rest would die. The advisors started talking over each other. Someone suggested using military weapons to destroy the asteroid, but the calculations showed it was too big. The pieces would still cause massive damage. Another advisor wanted to use gravity tractors to pull it off course, but there was not enough time. A third suggested evacuating key government officials and scientists. Sareth listened to all of it and felt rage building in her chest. These were her people, and she was supposed to protect them, and there was nothing she could do. Daniel had been sitting in his usual corner, and Zareth had almost forgotten he was there. That was still his way even after everything. He stayed quiet and watched and thought. Now he stood up and walked to the hologram display. He studied the asteroid carefully, and then looked at the trajectory calculations. Everyone watched him, but no one spoke. They had learned to pay attention when the humans started thinking. He said he had a solution. One of the advisors made a dismissive sound and asked how the human could solve a problem that their best scientists could not. Daniel did not seem bothered by the rudeness. He just explained calmly that they could not destroy the asteroid or move it in time, but they could change what it was made of. He manipulated the hologram to highlight specific points on the asteroid surface. He said the rock was mostly iron and nickel. If they drilled into it at precise locations and set off carefully calculated explosions, they could fragment it. The pieces would spread out, and most would burn up in the atmosphere. There would be some damage, but nothing extinction level. Some cities might get hit by smaller meteors, but billions of lives would be saved. General Vexnor objected immediately. He said they did not have explosives powerful enough for that kind of operation. Daniel agreed, and said that Zyrathia did not, but Earth did. There was a human mining ship 3 star systems away that used fusion charges to break up asteroids for mineral extraction. He had already contacted them, and they could be here in 40 hours. The general did more calculations, and said that would only leave 32 hours to drill and plant the charges. It was not enough time. Daniel's expression changed, and Zareth recognized it now. This was him being confident. This was him knowing he could solve the problem. He said it was enough time if they used human drilling techniques. He said he would lead the operation personally. Jarth wanted to say no. She wanted to keep him safe on the planet, away from danger. But she saw the determination in his eyes, and she knew he was right. This was what he did. He solved impossible problems. She gave the order, and told him to save their people. Daniel nodded once and left to prepare. The human mining ship arrived exactly on schedule. It was called the Frontier, and it looked old and battered, but its crew knew what they were doing. Daniel coordinated teams of human and Zarathian engineers. They worked in shifts around the clock. Massive drills cut into the asteroid, while Daniel calculated exactly where each charge needed to go. He barely slept. He moved from station to station, checking work and adjusting plans and encouraging tired workers. Zareth watched from the command center and could not look away from the display. She saw her husband's shuttle moving across the surface of the asteroid. She saw the drilling crews working in vacuum suits. She saw the countdown timer ticking down. Every minute that passed was a minute closer to either salvation or disaster. The work was dangerous. One drill team hit a pocket of ice that exploded outward and damaged their equipment. Daniel went out personally to help repair it. Another team got lost when their navigation system failed. Daniel talked them back using only radio and mathematics. A Zyraean engineer panicked when his suit started losing air. Daniel stayed on the radio with him and kept him calm while rescue arrived. With 4 hours left before impact, the last charge was planted. Daniel ordered everyone to evacuate the asteroid and return to the ships. The drilling crews packed up their equipment and launched. Daniel was the last one to leave. His shuttle cleared the asteroid surface with 2 hours to spare. Zareth finally breathed again when she saw his ship dock safely with the Frontier. Daniel had calculated the detonation sequence down to the millisecond. Each charge had to go off in exactly the right order, or the plan would fail. He triggered them remotely from the mining ship. The asteroid lit up on the sensors as the fusion charges exploded deep inside it. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then cracks appeared on the surface, spreading like lightning. The massive rock broke apart into thousands of pieces that spread out in a slowly expanding cloud. The fragments hit the colony world's atmosphere 12 hours later. The sky lit up with meteor showers that looked like fireworks. Some larger pieces made it through and caused damage. 3 cities had to be evacuated. A few thousand people were injured, but 8 billion people were alive because of what Daniel had done. When he returned to the palace, Zareth was waiting at the landing pad. She did not care that her entire court was watching. She ran to him and wrapped her arms around him and pressed her forehead to his. In the Zyra gesture of deepest love, she said he had saved millions of lives. Daniel held her gently and said that they had all saved those lives. Her engineers and her equipment, working with human techniques. That was what partnership meant. Jarth pulled back to look at him. She said that she had thought she was marrying a modest diplomat who would help with politics. Instead, she had married someone who could fight wars without firing weapons and save worlds without armies. Daniel laughed and looked embarrassed. He said he was still all those things. He said humans were complicated. She agreed and said she was grateful for every complication. She realized that their marriage had changed into something real, something that neither of them had expected, but both of them wanted. She had learned that humanity's true strength was not weapons or technology. It was their ability to adapt and create and solve problems that seemed impossible. And she had learned that the gentleman she married was also the bravest person she had ever known. The weeks after the asteroid crisis were busy with reconstruction, and Daniel threw himself into helping. He worked with Zarathan engineers to design better early warning systems for space hazards. He helped coordinate relief efforts for the cities that had been damaged. He visited hospitals and talked to people who had been injured. Zarath watched him move through her empire like he belonged there, and realized that he did. Somewhere along the way, her husband had stopped being a stranger and become part of her world. The other species in the galaxy were starting to notice the alliance between Zarathia and Earth. Trade requests came in from civilizations that had previously ignored humanity. Diplomatic overtures arrived from empires that wanted to know more about these unusual creatures. The Krell stayed very quiet and very far away. Word had spread about what happened, and other species were re-evaluating their assumptions about humans. General Vexnor told Zareth that the joint military training program was exceeding all expectations. Zarathan soldiers were learning human tactics, and humans were learning Zarathan philosophy. Both groups were becoming better warriors. More importantly, they were becoming friends. Cultural barriers were breaking down. The general said he had never seen 2 species integrate so quickly or so successfully. Jarth asked what made it work. Vexor thought about it and said it was respect. Zarathians had learned not to underestimate humans. Humans had learned that other species had wisdom to share. Both sides approached the partnership with genuine desire to learn. It helped that Daniel was there as a bridge between them. He understood both cultures, and could translate not just words but intentions and meanings. The palace had changed too. Human staff worked alongside Zyrathian servants. The kitchen served food from both worlds. The gardens had sections planted with earth flowers that somehow thrived in alien soil. Children from both species played together in the courtyards. It was not perfect, and there were still misunderstandings, but it was working. 2 civilizations were learning to live together, and it was beautiful. Sarth and Daniel moved into shared quarters 6 months after the asteroid. It felt natural by that point. They had been spending most evenings together anyway. Their relationship had deepened into something neither of them had expected when they signed the marriage contract. Love had crept up on them slowly, until one day, they both realized it had been there for a while. Daniel told her about his childhood on Earth, growing up in a small town, and being fascinated by computers. Joining the military because he wanted to serve. Discovering he had a talent for cyber warfare that frightened him sometimes. Leaving the military after seeing too much destruction, and choosing diplomacy instead. He said marrying her had been the best decision he ever made, even though it started as just a mission. Jarth told him about being raised to rule, the pressure of knowing billions of lives depended on her decisions, the loneliness of leadership, the fear that she might not be good enough. She said meeting him had changed her understanding of strength. She had thought strength meant never showing weakness. Daniel taught her that real strength meant knowing your capabilities and choosing when to use them and when to hold back. They were different in so many ways. She was tall and covered in scales. He was small and had soft skin. She had been raised in palaces. He grew up on a farm. She ruled star systems. He had lived quietly until circumstances forced him to act. But somehow, they fit together. They balanced each other. She gave him purpose, and he gave her perspective. The anniversary of their wedding arrived, and Zareth planned a celebration. She invited representatives from across the Empire and from Earth. It would be part political event and part genuine party. The night before, Daniel found her in her office looking stressed. He asked what was wrong, and she admitted she was nervous. She wanted everything to be perfect, because this anniversary meant more than just marking a year. It symbolized what their peoples had built together. Daniel sat on the edge of her desk and took her hand. He said it would be perfect, because they would be together. He reminded her that a year ago, they were strangers signing contracts. Now they were partners in every sense. They had faced down war fleets and saved worlds, and built something real. A party was easy compared to that. The celebration was indeed perfect. The great hall was decorated with symbols from both cultures. Music played that blended Zyraean harmonics with human rhythms. People danced and laughed and shared stories. Zareth stood with Daniel and watched their two peoples mingling freely. This was what they had built. This was what their marriage had created. General Vexnor made a toast. He said that a year ago he had doubted the wisdom of allying with humans. He thought they were too weak to be useful partners. He admitted publicly that he had been completely wrong. Humans were strong in ways that most species never considered. They were problem solvers and survivors and loyal friends. The alliance with Earth had made the Zarathian Empire stronger and safer. He raised his glass to Daniel and called him brother. Linda Hayes spoke next. She said that Earth had been alone in the galaxy before this alliance, young and inexperienced and vulnerable. The Zaraean Empire had offered friendship when other species offered only dismissal or conquest. Humans would remember that. She said the bond between their peoples would last for generations. She raised her glass to Zareth and called her friend. Later that night, after the guests had left Zareth, and Daniel walked in the gardens under the stars, the two moons were full, and the air was warm. Daniel pointed out constellations, and told her their human names. She showed him stars that marked the borders of their combined territory. Earth and Zyrathia together controlled a significant portion of this region of space. Zarath asked what he wanted to build next. Daniel smiled that gentle smile that she loved. Now he said they should focus on making the partnership even stronger. More cultural exchanges, and joint research, and shared defense. He wanted to show the galaxy what two species could accomplish when they worked together as equals. He wanted to prove that cooperation was better than conquest. She agreed completely. The galaxy was full of species that relied on strength and fear. The Krell conquered through force. Others ruled through intimidation. But Earth and Zarathia were building something different. An alliance based on respect and friendship and shared goals. It was slower and harder, but it would last longer and grow stronger. Daniel had been right a year ago, when he said he wanted to build a bridge between their peoples. But it was more than a bridge now. It was a foundation for something bigger. Two civilizations learning from each other and growing together. And at the center of it all was a marriage that had started as politics and become love. Jarth looked at her husband and felt grateful. She had married a man she thought was modest and unremarkable. She had discovered he was extraordinary. But the real gift was not his abilities or his skills. It was his heart. Daniel used his strength to protect and build rather than destroy. He chose compassion over violence whenever possible. He was exactly the partner she needed, and she was exactly the partner he needed. The future stretched before them full of possibilities. There would be challenges, certainly. The galaxy was dangerous and unpredictable, but they would face it together. Earth and Zarathia, Daniel and Zarath, partners and friends and lovers, and whatever came next, they would handle it the same way they had handled everything else, with intelligence and courage. and the understanding that they were stronger together than they ever could be apart. The alarm started before dawn and woke everyone in the palace. Red lights flashed in the hallways, and a voice over the speakers told everyone to stay calm. But Zareth knew what was happening before she even reached the command center. The Krell had come, and they had come with a war fleet. She ran down the corridor, still putting on her armor, and burst through the doors to find her military staff already gathered around the big table, with the hologram display floating above it. General Vexnor turned when she entered, and his face was grim. The hologram showed their star system, and at the edge of it was a cluster of red dots. Krell ships. Zareth counted them quickly and felt her heart sink. There were over 300 vessels out there, and they were already moving toward the inner planets. The Krell Dominion was infamous across the galaxy for one thing, and that was conquest. They did not negotiate, and they did not show mercy. They came, and they demanded surrender. And if you did not surrender, they destroyed everything. General Vexnor pulled up a message that had been broadcast from the Krell flagship. A deep voice spoke in the common tongue and said that the Zyra Empire had one day to surrender completely or face total destruction. All worlds would be occupied. All military forces would be disbanded. The Queen would step down, and the Krell would install their own governors. It was not really an offer. It was a demand wrapped in a thin layer of politeness. Jarth looked at her advisors and saw fear in their eyes. She called for reports, and the news was bad. The Krell outnumbered their defense fleet 3-1. The technology was about equal, but numbers mattered in space combat. Her best military minds ran simulations, and the computer gave them a 30% chance of winning if they fought. 30% was not good enough when the survival of billions of people was at stake. The advisors started arguing immediately. Some said they should fight anyway, because dying free was better than living under Krell rule. Others said they should try to negotiate better terms, even though everyone knew the Krell did not really negotiate. A few suggested running and abandoning the Empire to save whatever people they could fit on ships. Sareth listened to all of it, and felt the weight of leadership pressing down on her. Every choice led to death and destruction. There was no good answer. Daniel had been sitting in the corner of the room so quietly that Zareth had forgotten he was there. She had given him permission months ago to attend these meetings as her consort, but he never spoke and never interfered. He just sat and listened, and sometimes took notes. Now he cleared his throat softly, and everyone stopped talking. The room went silent, and all eyes turned to the small human in his simple clothes. Shaw felt annoyed for just a moment, because this was not the time for whatever small comment her husband wanted to make. But she was raised to be polite, so she nodded at him. Daniel stood up slowly and walked to the hologram. He looked at the red dots representing the Krell fleet, and then turned to face the room. He spoke in his quiet voice, and said that he had an idea. He said that he could go to the Krell flagship under a flag of truce and try to negotiate with their commander. It would buy time for the military to prepare defenses. If he failed, then nothing was lost, because the Krell were going to attack anyway. If he succeeded, then maybe they could avoid a war that would kill millions. General Vexnor made a clicking sound with his mandibles that was the Zarathian version of laughter. He said that the human thought he could talk down the Krell and that they would probably just eat him. Other advisors shook their heads. One said it was a waste of time. Another said it was foolish. But Zareth looked at her husband and saw something in his eyes that had not been there before. It was hard to describe, but it made her pause. She asked Daniel if he was sure, and he said yes in that same calm voice he always used. He said that he understood the risks, but that he wanted to try. Zara thought about it for a long moment. They had nothing to lose, really. If the Krell killed her husband, it would be terrible. But they were all probably going to die anyway. And if there was even a small chance that Daniel could buy them time, then it was worth trying. She agreed, and told him he could go. She also told him to be careful, because she did not want his death on her conscience. Daniel smiled that gentle smile, and said he would be very careful. He left the command center to prepare, and Zareth turned back to her military advisors. They had one day to get ready for a battle they probably could not win. Daniel went back to his room and changed into clean clothes. He did not wear anything fancy or formal, just simple pants and a shirt. He packed a small bag with a few items, and then walked to the shuttle bay. The pilot was waiting and looked nervous. Everyone knew this was probably a one-way trip. Daniel climbed into the shuttle and sat down and closed his eyes while they launched. The flight to the Krell flagship took an hour. The shuttle was small and unarmed, and it broadcast diplomatic codes the whole way. Daniel sat very still with his eyes closed and his hands resting on his knees. To anyone watching, he looked like he was meditating, or maybe praying. He was actually doing something very different. In his pocket was a device no bigger than a coin. It was linked to systems in his neural implants, and as the shuttle flew closer to the Krell fleet he was working, the device was scanning and probing and testing. It found the Krell communication networks and started mapping them. It found security protocols and started analyzing them. It found backdoors and vulnerabilities and cataloged them all. Daniel had designed this device himself back when he worked for Earth's Military Intelligence Division. It was illegal in most parts of the galaxy. It was also incredibly effective. By the time the shuttle docked with the Krell flagship, Daniel had a complete map of their network architecture. He had found 7 major security flaws and 20 minor ones. He had root access to their systems waiting behind a simple authorization code, and he had done it all without the Krell having any idea they had been compromised. He opened his eyes and stood up and walked off the shuttle with empty hands and a calm expression. The Krell guards met him at the airlock. They were huge creatures covered in black armor that looked like insect shells. They had weapons that could cut through metal, and they towered over the small human. Daniel smiled at them politely and asked to be taken to their commander. The guards looked at each other and then led him through the ship.